Hello and good afternoon, arts advocates, and welcome to Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund's office hours with our arts advocacy team. My name is Morgan Fernari, manager at the Arts Action Fund. I'm a 28-year-old white woman with freckles and shoulder-length curly auburn hair. I am currently wearing a red, black, and white patterned shirt and sitting in a hotel business center in Riverhead, New York. Americans for the Arts is committed to accessibility, and this includes our speakers offering visual description of themselves, which makes the webinar more accessible for audience members that are blind or have low vision. Additionally, there are Zoom-generated closed captions for audience members. You can access the closed captions by selecting the CC button in your Zoom toolbar. This webinar also includes live American Sign Language interpretation, which you can access by clicking on the globe icon in the Zoom toolbar and select ASL interpretation. We welcome our interpreters, Gina and Lucy, and thank them for their help today. And now we also want you to make sure you're asking your questions. So you have access to the Q&A feature, which is also located in the Zoom toolbar. That way you can ask our speakers questions throughout the webinar. We will do our best to answer all questions either by responding through the Q&A feature or aloud during the allotted Q&A segments of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for you to watch and share in the next week. You will also be able to find additional resources on our office hours landing page, and the link is currently being shared in the chat. In the event we don't get to all of our questions, because we want to make sure that you are heard and answered, we want you to please reach out to Americans for the Arts Public Policy Manager, Olivia Tarpley, so that we can keep in touch. Now, today's presentation will be broken up into two parts. So first, my colleague Nina Azu-Tunjali will interview Dan Sanchez, the Senior Director of Government Affairs for PBS, and followed by a Q&A session. Then, Tushar Swain will interview Ben Kershaw, Director of Public Policy and Government Relations at Independent Sector. There will then be another Q&A section. And then at the end, my colleague Olivia Tarpley will share additional information about our upcoming advocacy activations and how you can take action today. So on this next slide, you'll see all of our AFTA staff speakers. So Nina Azu-Tunjali, Executive Director of the Arts Action Fund and Chief Counsel of Government Affairs at Americans for the Arts. Tushar Swain, Director of Public Policy at Americans for the Arts. Olivia Tarpley, Public Policy Manager at Americans for the Arts. And myself, Morgan Fernari. On this next slide, you'll be able to see our two wonderful guest speakers who we are very, very fortunate to have with us today. Dan Sanchez, who's the Senior Director of Government Relations at PBS, and Ben Kershaw, who is the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations at the Independent Sector. Now, please welcome, we're gonna have Nina Azu-Tunjali and Dan Sanchez with us first. They'll come on screen shortly. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful webinar.
Thank you so much, Morgan. So I want to first describe myself as a Middle Eastern woman with long black hair with an Arts Vote backdrop designed by Shepard Ferry for the Arts Action Fund. And I want to welcome Dan Sanchez to our program. He's our guest speaker that I'll be interviewing first. And I want to remind you that while we're doing the interview, that's your time to ask any kind of burning questions that you have about what's going on with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and its funding for PBS and NPR. Because after I'm done with the interview, we will turn to your audience questions to be able to answer them to the best of our ability. So Dan, I want to ask you to start with a quick visual description of yourself and then begin with a little background about PBS, where you work, as well as the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and a little bit about NPR.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm Dan Sanchez, Senior Director of Government Relations at PBS. I'm a 56-year-old Hispanic male. I have short, brownish, grayish hair. I'm wearing a plaid button-down gray shirt, and I am talking to you from my home office. There's a bookcase behind me, which is blurred, which I may unblur so you can see my daughter's artwork. Um, and again, just happy to be here. So going right in, so the conversation today is about CPB funding. I actually worked for PBS, which is a separate organization. CPB is a private corporation which is funded by the federal government. And then through a statutory formula, that funding is then distributed out to NPR, PBS, and stations, with 70% of it going directly to stations. A little bit about PBS. PBS is a membership organization. We are not a network. Speaking about it in most simple terms, we are almost a club. Our stations are our members. We provide certain services to them. In addition to the content that we provide, services can be support for infrastructure, their operations. We provide legal support, fundraising and sustainability, marketing, communications, engagement, business intelligence, professional development. So what the stations essentially did, they came together, they aggregated their resources, and they created an economy of scale. It's not a good use of the investment, federal or otherwise, for every station to go out and conduct their own professional development or do their own business intelligence, or try and create their own high quality educational children's content. So PBS, what we do with those member dues, we apply those and we bring together the expertise that is needed, and we provide services and advice and guidance to our stations. I think that's just the shorthand version. The other thing we do is we operate an interconnection system. In other words, that is our distribution system. So the content that we help curate, we use that system to then distribute it to all of our member stations. PBS, and this is important, but it needs to be said, PBS does not create content. We curate it. We work with third-party producers for content. For example, the NewsHour is produced by WETA in Arlington, Virginia. What we do is we have agreements with them for distribution, and then we distribute it to all of our member stations. Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is created by the Fred Rogers Company out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And again, we come to agreements with them and we distribute that content. Frontline by WGBH in Boston is another example here. So again, we curate content. We don't actually create content. So you would never have seen, Big Bird walking through our building or Judy Woodruff. One of the things that we do, getting back to the interconnection or our distribution system, that is something we also use for nationwide emergency alerts. We support that system, the wireless emergency alerts through FEMA. Essentially, when you receive a wireless emergency alert on your phone, it's coming through your cell provider. That signal originates, it goes through FEMA, and then it is sent out to geo-targeted locations. It goes through to the cellular providers, but if that system breaks down, there needs to be a redundancy. There needs to be a backup. And because our stations reach 97% of American households, we are relied upon to be a partner, and we are the redundancy in that system. So, and this is especially important in times of tornadoes and hurricanes, when infrastructure is going down, we are there. So that's one of and I go into detail about that because it's one of the arguments that we have been making on the Hill about our essential service to the American public. And I want to also say that PBS does not, it stands for the Public Broadcasting Service. not system. Again, we are not a network. Our board is comprised of GMs from our stations, more than half of our board. So our ship is directed by the system itself. A lot of those things apply also to NPR. They distribute content to their stations. They also provide emergency alerts. They have a separate interconnection system or distribution system. And that's mainly because there are fewer PBS stations, but you need, I'll explain it the way the engineers did, you need smaller but big pipes to get content to TV. For NPR, there are many more stations. You need many more pipes, but smaller pipes because of what you're transferring. So those are the similarities we have. NPR is much more news focused. About only 10% of our content is news. We are, of course, known for our high quality kids content, some of our public affairs shows, and of course some of our other series. So with that, I'll let. I think it was a little long, but I think all those things are very important to understand here because you have to understand our system. Go ahead, Nina.
Yeah. And I specifically wanted Dan to lay out that landscape because we need to know what's at risk. If funding for these stations and NPR and PBS, and of course, Corporation for Public Broadcasting System are cut or eliminated, we need to know what's at risk, how it impacts communities large and small across the country, both radio and television. So the Corporation for Public Broadcasting has had a target on its back over the years. And it specifically had a target in the election campaign in 2024 with Project 2025 calling for its elimination. And then shortly after President Trump's inauguration, he released an executive order that targeted specifically NPR and PBS. Can you tell us what the situation is now and the fact that 100% of funding moving forward is in the current federal rescissions bill that's being contemplated by Congress? So
Sure.
if you could share that.
Yeah. I want to start off by making absolutely clear, and with no exaggeration, this is the most dire threat that public media has ever seen since its existence. There have been efforts in the past. They only made it so far. We right now are one floor vote away in the U.S. Senate from having funding for CPB eliminated. This clawback rescissions package has already passed in the House, 214 to 212. We did an amazing job making the vote that close, but it moved the process and this threat one step closer. There was a hearing on Wednesday in the Appropriations Committee. That's where it's called a special message from the White House. That's where it was referred to in the Senate and to the Senate Budget Committee. There were no votes taken, but it gave us an opportunity to take the temperature of certain senators, excuse me, and sort of get a somewhat clearer sense of where things may be heading. We were heartened by the fact that Senator Susan Collins, the chair of the Appropriations Committee, expressed a lot of concerns, not only about cuts to PEPFAR, but also to CPB. She acknowledges that there may be some issues that senators may have, but elimination of CPB is not the way to go about addressing these. The rescissions bill can be amendable on the Senate floor. I think technically it could be amendable in the Appropriations Committee. We don't really expect that to happen. It can be amendable on the Senate floor. And we are working right now to try and sort of affect something where we are we either taken out of the package or put in a much different positive position if this rescissions package were to be approved by the Senate. There's an opportunity to discharge the rescissions bill from committee. That may happen as early as July 7th. That will be a 1 hour vote on the discharge. It doesn't necessarily mean that the final vote on rescissions will happen at the same time. The bill will then be placed on the calendar. Where that ends up, we don't know, because right now what's really taking up all the oxygen in the Senate is reconciliation. And one of the challenges with that is a number of people are confusing reconciliation with rescission, and they're two completely different things. Rescissions is a clawback of previously enacted funds. Rescissions is these are major changes to tax provisions and other spending programs. They're completely separate. What brings them together is that they're both in the Senate right now, and reconciliation is a high priority. Our hope is that it can eat up enough floor time that it makes it very difficult to take this vote on rescissions. Once the rescissions bill came from the White House, it basically has 45 days deadline. If it's not passed or approved by then the bill ostensibly dies and loses its special privileges. That date is July 18th. I mentioned the special privileges because rescissions bills are not subject to a filibuster. They can pass with simply 51 votes or a majority plus one. So this bill is on somewhat of an expedited schedule. Dilatory tactics are not really going to slow it down because they can't be applied here in a lot of cases. So we are we are working, as I said, to try and affect some change to this bill. Now, if it passes, what does that mean? CPB receives through a budget mechanism, it receives advance funding. So we are told 2 years in advance, or CPB is told 2 years in advance what its funding is going to be. Partly that is to protect, and this is part of the Public Broadcasting Act, protect CPB and its work from extraneous interference. We call it the firewall. It also helps with planning and management of productions. Our kids' content, creation of it is rigorous. It is research based. It is produced in a very thoughtful process. But you need to know that you're going to have those federal dollars there. They're the cornerstone of the funding. We need to know that we're going to have those federal dollars there to continue this investment and continue this work. I will say that for every $1 that is provided by the federal government, the system will go out and find another $6. But that is the core funding. And if I'm a donor and I see that this 2-year advance provides a certain level of stability in the system, I have more of an incentive to support that. So that's where the $1 to $6 ratio comes in. So that's one of the many reasons why this advance funding is so important. But if it goes away, it is all the stations get hit twice. So in one way, they get something. It's a direct grant from CPB. There are very few prohibitions on how that funding can be used. Again, it can be used to keep the lights on. It can be used for salaries. You can put gas into the station van. Infrastructure upgrades or repairs. if that money goes away, that's a huge problem, as you can see. It also would impact us and all the services that we provide, we being PBS, that we provide to stations. So stations are denied that funding, and they're also denied the services that are provided. On average, stations rely on federal funding for about 15% of their budgets. That's on average. There are some stations in the system that are as high as nearly 50%, 50. So if that funding goes away, you can imagine the funding that would be removed would be FY26, which begins October 1st. So if that funding is removed, stations basically have 90 days or so to be able to be forced to pivot and figure out how they are going to keep the lights on and keep serving their communities with a very short notice. And again, at 50%, it can't, can it be done? Probably not. 40, 30. So what we've done is we've taken a look at the number of stations that are out there and their reliance on the federal grant that comes from CPB. And 34 stations are reliant on the federal dollars from CPB for 30% or more of their operating budgets. So those are the ones that we see as being most at risk. And they are from across the country. But if you go through and you tally up the number of people that are reached by those stations, it comes to about 30 million people who may be at risk of losing service, maybe on the sooner side of the catastrophe that would come out of this funding. I'll also add that CPB, not only do they fund general programming, which you might refer to as primetime, or kids content, but it's also our funding for independent producers. ITVS is in there. It threatens funding for POV, the National Multicultural Alliance. All those things are at risk, and if the funding is eliminated, then that is it's catastrophic.
Dan, tell us how we can stop this. Tell us how, if I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to make sure people hear how they can take action.
Okay.
What site do they need to go to? Do you prefer they call or email or tackle them at the grocery store this week?
So or at 4th of July parades, really, we are trying to figure out how we reach folks at 4th of July parades. There is a website, protectmypublicmedia.com, and I'll put it into, there you go. Thank you, Lucy.
It's .org, I believe, right?
It is. But if you do .com, Google will redirect you. But okay, please just do .org. That will provide regular updates. It will get you signed up. It'll get you connected with your senator and your member of Congress. House members are still important because if this thing gets amended, then it's going to have to go back through the House. So we're going to have to go through that process again. So please reach out to both. Right now, we are at more of a simmer than a boil, just because there's, a couple of weeks ago when we were waiting for the vote and we knew it was going to be, we had the temperature turned all the way up. And I mean, it was boiling over, but you can't keep that level. You can't stay at that level all the time. Your advocates have to have a bit of a break, and there's a natural break that's occurring now. And there's also, I mean, it's impossible to break through with all the news that's happening now. I mean, whether it's the Trump and Musk divorce or the Israelis, bombing Iran, or then our involvement, it's very hard to break through. Right. So, but please sign up, have your friends sign up. We have been pretty successful. This site's been around for 8-9 years now, so it was ready for this moment. There's been about 2 million touches to the Hill so far. There was one office who said, "Can you please make the phone stop ringing?" Kind of the gold standard right now is phone calls. I mean, emails are good, but if you're willing to pick up the phone, it's just another level of engagement, of activity, that shows you how invested these folks feel in wanting to preserve this, this service.
Yes. Thank you, Dan.
We
Olivia.
have an audience question here. The question is, what is the best way to connect with arts organizations that are still functioning? It sounds like this audience member is saying that the communications staff are not responding when they're making inquiries about upcoming programming. Do you have some insights on ways for folks to get in touch with, their local stations, or any other advice there?
So this is a local arts organization that's having a hard time connecting with their local station.
It seems like that might be it. Yes.
Olivia, I actually think that that's more of a question about reaching federal agencies like the NEA and NEH. But there was a different question, Dan, that you answered in your presentation after the question was already posed and you didn't realize it. And that is, if the Senate does amend the bill on the floor, does it have to go back to the House for it to be voted on to match it or
Yes.
negotiated? Yeah.
Yes.
So, and that might run out the clock anyways.
I mean, it prolongs the process, but the House is much more agile in being able to bring a bill to the floor and vote on it than the Senate is under Senate rules. And right now they are not having to deal with reconciliation, and they can shift their calendar the way that they need.
That's true.
But yeah, if the House needs to, they can move pretty quickly on it.
Okay. Okay. Olivia, do you want to introduce Tushar for the next panel?
Sure, yes.
I just say one quick thing, and I know we're about at time. Thank you to Americans for the Arts for all the support that you have provided. You sent a letter to the Appropriations Committee in support of our funding. Every friend, every advocate that weighs in, I mean, is important and so helpful. Thank you again. And I also want to say from a personal standpoint that my daughter was in children's community theater. I was not involved in that. I really didn't know what that was all about, but I wanted to be around. So I was the dad who was part of set builds and tech week and opening night. I moved the sets. I tore down, my wife ran the after party, and it had such a great impact, not only on me, but my daughter. So I really appreciate everything about this. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the arts community. Thank you.
And Olivia, I told this to Dan yesterday. As a first-generation American myself, Mr. Rogers taught me how to speak English and got me ready for elementary school.
We certainly appreciate you, Dan, and all of the amazing work that you all are doing, and are glad to be in partnership with you. And Nina, thank you so much for your insights. If you both are able to stick around, there might be a few more questions coming into the Q&A box. And as panelists, you should be able to answer those easily. So thank you for continuing to share your time with us. We're excited to bring on our colleagues Tushar Swain and Ben Kershaw for our next conversation. So Tushar and Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Olivia. And Nina and Dan, Mr. Rogers taught me how to speak English too. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tushar Swain. I'm a Director of Public Policy at Americans for the Arts. I am a middle-aged man with a bald head and brown skin. Today, I am wearing my glasses and a pink collar shirt with blue stripes. I'm in my office with two pieces of artwork behind me on my wall. Over the course of the last several months, we've heard a lot about moving President Trump's agenda through reconciliation via the Big Beautiful Bill. These priorities will have effects on the nonprofit sector, including nonprofit arts organizations. We have one of the best experts in Washington, D.C. to talk to us about these issues and more. Ben Kershaw is Independent Sector's Director of Public Policy and Government Relations, where he works to advance a policy agenda that protects and promotes nonprofit organizations' ability to serve their communities. Before joining Independent Sector, he was the Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs at the American Alliance of Museums. Ben also served as a legislative assistant to U.S. Senator Jeanne Shaheen and to U.S. Representative Patrick Kennedy, advising them on a wide range of issues, including tax and budget policies. Hi, Ben, and can I invite you to give a physical description of yourself?
I'd be happy to, Tushar, with thanks for your warm professional description of me. It's very kind of you. I'm a middle-aged white man matching Tushar in a pink button-down shirt today. I just got my first haircut in 4 years. I have a beard, and behind me are travel photos and my daughter's coats hanging.
Great.
Do you want me to talk about independent sector a little bit, Tushar?
Please talk
Great.
about independent sector.
So as Tushar noted, I joined independent sector 7.5 years ago. Still think of myself as a displaced arts and museums advocate. Don't tell everyone around the office that I said that. We are the national membership organization that represents charities, nonprofits of every size and type, and foundations of every size and type, as well as corporate giving programs and academic centers working to promote the health of the whole charitable sector. So our members are sort of as diverse as that sounds, and I know that the Americans for the Arts staff might emphasize with this. Their diverse perspectives are as diverse as you might guess. We're really at our strongest when we are functioning not as a direct mouthpiece, but as a network of networks. And so that's why we're so grateful to work with and have as members people like Americans for the Arts, to help all of us work together in the same direction on things that impact the whole sector's ability to serve communities. So we commission research. We're not a research organization. We run a few high impact programs. We think they're high impact. And we bring the sector together around things that unite the sector. And a lot of that work is policy work, which I have the pleasure of working with Tushar and many other folks on.
Thanks, Ben. Your work and independent sector's work has been invaluable to Americans for the Arts and to me. We sit on your public policy committee, we're on your coalition calls all the time, and we're able to really just gain some real extensive knowledge on what's going on in the Hill, as well as nonprofit research. I think the reason why many are tuned in today is talking a little bit about the big beautiful bill or reconciliation. So could you give some of our viewers, particularly our first time participants, some background on what reconciliation is?
I'd be happy to. So right, as you noted, I worked on Capitol Hill on budget and tax issues. So I'm going to try to spare you a lot of that because I don't think it's super essential at kind of at this critical time. This process was created in 1974. A lot of the strictures of it were, amended and recreated in, 1985 and 1990. It's essentially an expedited process for passing legislation that gets around the Senate's filibuster rules. Usually, the Senate needs 60 votes to clear a filibuster. Under the budget reconciliation process, if you can keep to it, you can pass a bill with 50 votes plus one. In this, when a party controls the White House, that can be the vice president as the tie-breaking vote. The strictures of it are that there are only certain things you're allowed to do in a reconciliation bill. You're only allowed to really do one comprehensive reconciliation bill per year. And you can only include changes to mandatory spending, right? These are programs where the spending is determined by eligibility criteria and not by how much Congress decides to spend annually. You can make changes to tax laws, and you can raise the statutory debt limit in a reconciliation bill. Again, as Dan and Nina were talking earlier, you can't cut funding for CPB or arts or museum funding generally through reconciliation process. But there's a lot you can do.
Thanks, Ben. And where are we in this current reconciliation process?
So again, the reconciliation process requires both chambers of Congress to agree on a budget resolution. They did that a few months ago. And then the rubber hits the road in terms of individual committees writing their own pieces of legislation to comply with those instructions. The House of Representatives has completed its first pass at that process and passed a bill, late last month. And the Senate committees have all released their proposals. And if you've picked up a newspaper in the last few weeks, you've seen Senate Republicans trying to all get on the same page with each other about what they want to include in their bill, and while also making sure that what they pass at least stands a chance of passing the House of Representatives again. We expect, the targets are moving a little bit, but the earliest we're expecting text to come out of the Senate Republican caucus is tomorrow at this point, potentially with votes starting on Sunday, but they have a number of procedural challenges and substantive disagreements that they need to resolve before they'll be able to move forward, still aiming at that July 4th bill signing that President Trump is hoping for.
Great, thanks, Ben. You all at Independent Sector have put together a nice comparison chart of House and Senate nonprofit tax provisions. Camille, can you put up a slide of that chart? And then you can also follow along a little bit more closely as we'll put the link in the chat, and I'll try to reference where we're at while Ben is talking. But Americans for the Arts top tax priority issue is enacting the charitable deduction for those who do not itemize on their taxes. Ben, can you explain the importance of this and the trends that suggest that the deduction is needed to spur smaller donations?
I'd be happy to, Tushar. So, and this is an issue that I worked on with Americans for the Arts and Independent Sector. When I was with the museums, it's kind of a longstanding priority, I think, for all of us in this sector to try to increase the resources that are coming into the sector. And resources that come from the community and from individuals rather than dealing with a lot of the problems that we've seen lately around government funding. So in 2017, the last time Republicans controlled all levers of government, they passed comprehensive legislation which forms the outlines of much of what they're trying to make permanent in this bill. And I take them at their word that sort of by accident or by happenstance, they dramatically reduce the number of Americans who itemize on their taxes. That is, people who don't claim the standard deduction. And as a result, we went from about a third of all Americans having access to the charitable deduction to around 10%. So put another way, 9 in 10 Americans right now don't have any tax incentive to donate to charity. And I think it's been pretty conclusively demonstrated, not just by advocates hooting and hollering about it, but by academic researchers, that legislation did lead to billions of dollars less in charitable giving as a result. In the tune of $16 billion a year that's just not getting donated anymore. So those resources are really critical to get back into the system. But again, I don't think the answer is that the charitable deduction ought to go back to being available to 1 in 3 Americans. The right amount of Americans, we believe, is 100% that ought to have access to some charitable giving incentive. And again, this is important for total resources, but it's also important to address a longer term trend that has nothing to do with partisan politics or reconciliation legislation. That, over the last 20 years, you've seen fewer and fewer Americans giving to charity at all. And we really strongly believe that even if you had the same number of dollars in the system, a charitable sector that is supported only by a few Americans looks really different than one with a broad base of support. And so the dollars are really important, and the number of donors, the number of Americans giving is also really important.
Thanks, Ben. That's great. And just for all of you who are following in the chart, whenever we put it in the chat, non-itemizer deduction is on page 2 at the bottom. And that again is what we're talking about and what we are advocating for at Americans for the Arts is our top tax issue. Ben, is there any research out there that you've come across that folks can point to? We've had some advocates who are saying, who say, small dollar, that they'd like some research to back up the non-itemizer deduction as being helpful to increase small donations. Is there any research that exists?
So it's good question, Tushar. I think one key piece of research is this study I referenced by researchers at Indiana University and other institutions, published in the National Bureau of Economic Research. And it's the study that we think most conclusively demonstrates $16 billion in giving was lost as a result. And so that's one thing to point to. In terms of research around the impact of a non-itemizer charitable deduction, I hate to plug our stuff, but back in 2019, Independent Sector commissioned some research, again working with Indiana, around what a few proposals to create a non-itemizer or universal charitable deduction could mean for giving. And they all found that those proposals, in various forms, would increase giving by billions of dollars and increase the number of donors by millions of dollars. I don't have that one handy, but I'm happy to share it with you all.
Thank you. Ben, there are right that we're talking about some really good news here with the non-itemizer deduction. Can you talk just about some other tax provisions that could be harmful for nonprofits and that independent sector has really been at the forefront of advocating against?
I'd be happy to, and I don't want to be a total downer, so let me start from 4 things. I'm holding up 4 fingers that were really concerning in the bill that passed the House of Representatives. And then, a spoiler that 2 of them are not in the Senate bill right now, right? So the House bill proposed a really significant increase in the tax rate that private foundations pay, a tax rate that would grow much larger for larger private foundations. And the official scoring shows that would have sucked $16 billion over the next decade out of private foundation endowments and put it into government coffers to pay for everything else that's in this bill. There's some estimates that that tax actually would have hurt much more than that as well. So that's thanks to advocacy from Americans for the Arts and IS and a lot of other partners, not just in DC but around the country. That is not in the Senate finance bill. And then there's another one that I don't want to spend too much time on because it'll make people's veins burst. But there was a tax proposed around parking benefits and transit benefits that nonprofits provide to their employees and making nonprofits pay an income tax on that expense. It's as ridiculous as it sounds, and it's not in the Senate finance bill. So the two things that are in the bill that are that are also addressed in some research we released yesterday are the following. So the bill proposes to create a limit on the value of all itemized deductions, and that includes the charitable deduction. And it proposes to limit this value for taxpayers who are roughly in the 37% income tax bracket. So it's, individuals making in the 600s a year and, married couples making in the 700s a year. These are high income individuals. And, data shows that, God bless them, about half of itemized giving comes from these households. And so this reduction in the value of all deductions, including the charitable deduction, again, the research we released yesterday predicts a decline in annual giving of $4 to $6 billion per year. That's a really concerning number for us, and I think for all of us. The other really problematic provision that's in the Senate finance bill that we're working on, it's not the only other thing we dislike, is a new limit on corporations claiming a charitable deduction, essentially disallowing the first percent of their taxable income that they donate to charity from being claimed against their corporate income tax. So, right, if a corporation has, well, I won't try to do the math off the top of my head. I'm happy to follow up further explanations there. Again, research that we publicly released yesterday shows that this could lead to a drop in giving of about $4.5 billion every year. Both of those numbers are not just alarming because they decrease, resources for the charitable sector. And they're not just alarming because they're taxing us to pay for other stuff in the bill, which we firmly object to. The damage done to giving is actually significantly worse than the government revenue that these taxes would raise, right? So even if you thought it was a good idea to tax our sector to pay for other stuff, these proposals are kind of a lose-lose for everyone involved.
Thanks, Ben. For all of you who are following on the chart, the limit on benefit of itemized deductions is on the first page at the bottom, and then on page 4 is some information at the bottom on corporate charitable giving floor. And are those two provisions, Ben, are they both in the House and the Senate bill?
They're both in the House bill, and they're both in the version that the Senate Finance Committee released. They are also, I think they withstood that initial hurdle in a way, but we know that legislators are hearing about both of those as a problem right now. But yeah, they're both in. If you're thinking what's in and out, I would say they're in right now.
Got it. And I see that just on the participant list that we have some folks who are part of private foundations. What advice would you have to them in terms of advocating from here on out?
So I can't give any legal advice,
Sure.
but I will note that it has, generally been the opinion of, our organization and close partner organizations like the Council on Foundations that some of the provisions that I've been on my soapbox about right now, would probably not qualify for a self-defense exemption from the absolute prohibition on lobbying for private foundations, but that things like the private foundation endowment excise tax certainly would. And I've also seen other opinions that in writing that the charitable deduction is also falls within that self-defense exemption. So that's some sort of information I could provide.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that. Looking here, question in the chat. What is the status of the White House proposals to revoke nonprofit status?
It's a great question. I would love to ask them. So we've seen really concerning and unprecedented signals from the Trump administration, even from the president himself, that certain organizations are doing things that ought to cause them to lose their status, to translate some of it. And I would just remind all of us that there's an explicit prohibition in law, I think punishable by up to 5 years in jail, for an official directing the IRS to investigate any individual or organization. So they're really concerning things that have been talked about. And as of yet, nothing concretely, proposed. Not to deluge you all with too many links, but because there is so much out there around executive orders and court cases and legislation potentially impacting our sector, we have partnered with a law firm that track all of this stuff for all of us. And I'm happy to share some of those trackers in there to help people stay up to date. Those links update on their own, or they're updated every 2 weeks automatically.
Thanks. Can you, Ben, there's mention in the chat about the itemized floor. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, happy to. So I talked about the corporate floor, right, disallowing that first % of deductions. So the House of Representatives, I think, to take a quick step back, the House of Representatives included something pretty encouraging in its proposal, which was that for a few years at least, they proposed giving every American access to the charitable deduction. Unfortunately, they proposed a really low limit on the maximum amount that someone could deduct when donating to charity, $150 per person. That's what passed the House of Representatives. The Senate proposal around the charitable deduction for individuals is very different, and it has two pieces to it. On one hand, the Senate proposes, led by Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, to create a non-itemizer or universal deduction for charitable giving that is permanent and that is up to $1,000 per person, double if you're married. In order to offset that cost to Treasury, the bill also proposes putting a floor only for people who itemize their donations, right? So not for non-itemizers, but just for itemizers, a floor of 0.5% of their adjusted gross income. So if a household earns $100,000, God bless them, they donate $1,500 to charity, they can't deduct $500 of that. But every other dollar they deduct after $500, every other dollar they donate, they can deduct. That's how that floor is proposed to work. And it's our understanding that those two proposals are kind of linked within the author's thinking. What I think we don't know yet is what the net impact of that on charitable giving is going to be. And believe me, I would love to understand that better. And we'll continue to work and talk to folks to try to understand the impact of that. So that's a very substantial proposal around the charitable deduction, whose impact we're eager to understand better.
Thanks, Ben. There's a question in the chat, just wanting clarification, that the revocation of tax exempt status, the authority of of Treasury, that provision had been removed. Did you say that there's concern that it could be still added in a final bill?
Authority to revoke tax exempt status. Okay, I think I know what this is talking about, and it's a really important issue that the questioner raises. Um, so if and this is also in our handy chart that Tushar's mentioned. So when the Ways and Means Committee, right, the tax writing committee in the House of Representatives, drafted its initial legislation and passed its version through committee, there's a provision in there that was proposed in legislation in the last Congress. That the bill number on that was HR 9495. And this was a proposal that would have given the Secretary of the Treasury broad authority to designate an organization as supporting terrorism and to suspend its tax exempt status. It tried to create an appeal process and some other process there, but as I know, Tushar and this group are very familiar. The due process was, wholly inadequate and really concerning. So that provision passed House committee. It didn't pass the House of Representatives. It was taken out before the bill passed the House of Representatives. And we would be really, really shocked to see it come back at this point in the process. If it couldn't even pass the House where that was kind of its source of support.
That is great news. We know that there were a lot of arts advocates who called in to try to ensure that was stripped. And the independent sector, you were at the head of that as well. And that is on the last page of the chart, the very last provision. Ben, thank you so much for your time and everything that you do at Independent Sector. You all are just a great source of knowledge. I guess I'm going to end by asking you if you can prognosticate to see where we end up here in terms of timing, at least.
Sure. I try to stay out of the predictions business, too sure. And that's not because I'm wise, but because I've been burned too many times. The Republican Party is really, really invested in passing this legislation and passing it as soon as possible. And I think that their desire to pass it as soon as possible is not just because July 4th bill signing with flags, sounds like great cinema, but because they know that the longer this is out there, the more unpopular it becomes with the public. I think that's what the polling has shown. And that's true for a lot of legislation, honestly. So I think they're going to try really hard to pass this thing, and I don't think they're going to go home without either passing it or having a full scale meltdown where it fails in the floor of one of the chambers. So I think there's a decent chance they pass something, if not by July. I have also heard more plugged in people than me say that there's whatever passes the Senate is absolutely going to get changed by the House just so that the House can feel like they did something and ruined some more senators' weekends. So.
Well, great, Ben. Thank you so much again, and thank you for your just dedication and your strong commitment to the nonprofit sector, and for being a good friend to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Tushar and team. Honor.
Thank you again, Ben and Tushar and Dan and Nina. We appreciate all of your insights and also your partnership as well. We have just a couple of pieces of information to share with you all as you're heading into your weekend. And the first thing that we want to share with you all is while today we have focused on the rescissions package and reconciliation bill, here at Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Center, we are working on fiscal year 2026 appropriations over the next several weeks, as a lot of folks in and around DC and in the advocacy space are. And so part of that, of course, will be funding for the National Endowment for the Arts. So you can take action today, whether by emailing or calling your member of Congress and asking that they support the National Endowment for the Arts in fiscal year 2026 appropriations. In addition, some of the links that have already been shared in the chat are available to you all as you're doing your individual advocacy. So we've got Protect My Public Media, their Action Center and Action Items, Independent Sector Action Center, and the Charitable Giving Coalition Action Center. So those are all resources that we encourage you all to take advantage of and to share to your members of Congress what's important to you and your communities. And our last piece of information for you all today is that we will have all of these resources and the recording available as soon as possible. I got word from my colleague Morgan that she is going to work to get the recording up ASAP. So if you're looking for the recording of this webinar, check back on this webpage probably as soon as tomorrow, and we'll have that recording available for everyone, as well as all of the resources mentioned today. And we appreciate everything that you all are doing across the country. Please keep in touch with us. We are here for you to support you and to provide additional information as needed. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend. Take care, everyone.
Hello and good afternoon, arts advocates, and welcome to Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund's office hours